There's a lot of pressure on South Yorkshire's Police and Crime Commissioner to step down today. Shaun Wright was responsible for children's services at Rotherham Council between 2005 and 2010. And we can speak to Shaun Wright now. He joins us now live from Barnsley. Thanks very much indeed for talking to us here this morning. What's your reaction to Alexis Jay's report?
Good welcome. Well, I'm completely astonished by the scale of the issue that's been identified over that 17-year period. And I'm just as disgusted as any other right-minded thinking person in Rotherham and indeed across the country to the scale of this problem, and have sought to do everything possible in my power during any role that I've held, both as a Cabinet member and now as South Yorkshire PCC, to make that difference and to protect and safeguard more children from the perpetrators that would commit this heinous crime.
Well, let's talk about your role. At least 1,400 children in Rotherham sexually exploited by criminal gangs between the years of 1997 and 2013. You've been Police and Crime Commissioner since 2012. You were also responsible for children's services on Rotherham Council between 2005 and 2010. This was on your watch, wasn't it?
Well, of course, when you're a member of the council with a responsibility for a particular portfolio, you take collective responsibility. And, of course, at every stage, and it's even identified in the Alexis Jay report, at every stage that anything was brought to my attention, then I took the appropriate course of action. I supported officers, I made the relevant amount of investment, and I made the case for more resources being put into safeguarding children. But, of course, this is not just about resources. Clearly what's been identified in the report was a range of other issues, from cultural issues to ethnicity issues. And, of course, that has come as a huge surprise to me, because clearly none of that was brought to my attention, and had it been, then more robust action would have been taken. Of course, with the benefit of hindsight, looking back over a period like this report as of 17 years, speaking to all the main people involved in safeguarding children during that period of time, the picture's now being painted that there was real significant issues around at the time that perhaps many people weren't quite aware of. Absolutely, as a councillor, you're aware of child abuse and the various forms that takes, including CSE. But what Mrs. or Professor Jay has painted a picture of is really an industrial scale of child abuse that was taking place, and to that extent I was simply not aware of the scale of that problem. Had I been aware of the issue then, like I am today, then clearly much more action would and could have been taken.
Well, yes, and yet Alexis Jay also says that after 2004 and 2005, so the time that you were in charge of children's services, she says no one on the council could say that they didn't know about what was going on. So what did you know?
Well, of course, I became the Cabinet member in May 2005, and what the report demonstrates, because Mrs. Jay looked at every report and every minute of every meeting that I ever participated in, and actually commented that I was very supportive at every stage, that the relevant investment was made. For example, in 2006 there was a report about risky business, the part of the council responsible for safeguarding children against this, and I doubled the investment. And at every stage of any report being brought forward, then appropriate action was taken.
Okay.
But of course what this report demonstrates is that lots of information wasn't escalated up to political level or indeed to senior management level, and for that I'm usually shocked and usually sorry.
Okay, let me just...
And of course, had I known at that stage, like any right-minded thinking human being, then more action would have been taken.
3 reports, 2002, 2003 and one in 2006 when you were in charge of children's services. We're told they contained stark evidence and it was very clear what the problem was. That report, surely you would have seen.
Well, I can tell you categorically now that I didn't see any of those reports in 2002 or 3. I didn't see any of those reports, and the report that came in 2006 didn't actually come to me. It went to the Children's Safeguarding Board and it wasn't referred on, as far as I'm aware. So none of those reports refer to any decisions that I made or could have made with the knowledge or the benefit of that knowledge at the time.
So that's a major fault in the system. You're saying that you didn't get to see any of these reports highlighting these claims?
Well, sure. I mean, what the report what the report, I'm sorry, but what the report clearly demonstrates is a timeline from 1997 to the current date. And it shows that hundreds of young people were let down by various agencies, Rotherham Council, South Yorkshire Police being the two main ones. And of course I was involved with Rotherham Children's Services for a period of 5 years during the middle of that. And what I'm saying to you is, what the report identifies and what the Chief Executive of the Council has identified is that there was systemic failure. So in a sense everyone shares responsibility for that failure, and I took my responsibility seriously back in 2009 when Ofsted identified Rotherham Council's Children's Services as not being fit for purpose. I made first of all sure that there was an action plan in place to make sure that that was addressed and addressed as quickly as possible, and then in 2010 I stood down from that position and subsequently left the Council in 2012 and took up the position of South Yorkshire Police Commissioner. And of course what you do throughout your career, you learn, you gain experience, and I brought all that experience to bear in the current role that I'm in. And over the last 2 years I'm very proud of the progress that South Yorkshire Police has made in dealing with this very heinous crime. And of course there's a lot more progress still to be made, because there will always unfortunately be people around, evil perpetrators of this crime, that want to abuse and take advantage and exploit young people. And I've taken all of that learning, brought it to bear. There's now a tenfold increase in the number of police officers dealing with this in South Yorkshire. We've got over 200 live investigations. There's been a £5 million increase.
OK, I'm going to interrupt you. Apologies, because you say everyone takes responsibility, but no one has faced disciplinary action in the council, have they? Has anyone faced disciplinary action?
Well, that's a matter for the Chief Executive to take appropriate action of any officers who he feels
what about the police, then?
Acted inappropriately.
Has anyone taken action?
Mr Kimber is on record as saying that he will write.
Apologies,
yes, well,
I know we have a problem with the delay. I just want to ask you about the police, though, because you are obviously Police and Crime Commissioner. Has anyone faced disciplinary action in the police?
Given that the... Sure. Not yet, but I've spoken to the Chief Constable yesterday and I've asked him to take a very careful and close look at all the recommendations and all the facts contained within this 138-page report, and where he feels it's necessary to take action against any individuals, then that action will be taken. And indeed, I will be looking forward to a report coming from the Chief Constable to identify any lessons that can be learnt, any actions that need to be taken, and of course any referrals that need to be made to the IPCC or indeed any other professional body will be made. Believe you me, this is a top priority for South Yorkshire Police. It has been since 2012. It will continue to be a top priority going forward for as long as I'm in this particular role. And I would merely reiterate what I've said previously, that I apologise to any of the victims, because in the end what's important is protecting young people. And I've always sought to protect young people. I'm a parent myself, and I find it completely soul-destroying to understand that there's so many young people that are being abused in this way. And as a responsible parent, responsible adult, I'm doing everything in my power to make sure that this is adequately tackled here in South Yorkshire and especially in Rotherham.
We're just going to hear, if you can just wait just a moment, we're just going to hear from the report author, Alexis J, something that she had to say yesterday.
If all of the authorities involved, officers and members, had been less concerned with their own agendas and prejudices and kept their focus on the children's welfare, some of these children might not have suffered the abuse and brutality we read about and heard about.
What's your response to that?
Well, of course, if Professor J has found areas of concern around that, she should have named the people involved. I gave an interview to Miss J as part of this review, and I was very explicit that where criticism should be made or needed to be made, it should be as open and explicit as possible. And, you know, if that's the findings of Miss J, then that's for Miss J to speak to that. But clearly I wasn't aware or involved in any inappropriate behaviour in that sense. So, in a sense, the report perhaps could have gone a little further in identifying those particularly responsible, because generalising and making general statements is obviously very difficult for the people in positions to take action to actually take that appropriate action.
And you gave evidence, didn't you, to the Home Affairs Select Committee on this issue. In that, you said, whilst I was aware that some of the vulnerable young people I saw could have suffered sexual abuse, I was not informed of individual circumstances. I do not believe it would have been appropriate for me to request to meet victims of child sexual exploitation, as this would have been an invasion of the privacy of these vulnerable young victims. Do you regret that now? Do you think that you should have spoken to some of these victims and found out for yourself what they were going through?
I think that was an entirely appropriate course of action to take. Clearly, as an elected politician, it's not appropriate to be asking to speak to young people that have been victims of this sort of abuse. Now, clearly, I've met many victims, both children and adults, who have made an approach and shared their story, and I've obviously learnt and understood the damage that this does far better as a result of those conversations. But it wouldn't have been appropriate, and it never should be appropriate for politicians to directly ask a young person to explain their experience. That's for professionally trained people that can give the proper support to these young people at the appropriate time. So I stand by that statement, and I'm very happy to reiterate it.
Just to be clear, 16 years of appalling abuse in many cases, 5 years on your watch. Do you think you should still be in a job that has responsibility for protecting children?
Well, what the report clearly identifies is systemic failure. It's got the benefit of hindsight, it's got the benefit of speaking to a range of people, from chief executives to councillors to police commanders to people, senior people within the health sector and other sectors. And with all of that knowledge, clearly it paints a picture that there was systemic failure. And of course, I was part of that organisation at the time, and I took that responsibility very seriously in 2009. When Ofsted, prior to that, Ofsted was saying Rotherham Council's Children's Services was rated as good. In 2009, they came in and found areas that needed improvement and rated the services inadequate.
So
I made sure that there was
sorry to interrupt.
proper
If you
action plan
take
in
the
place to take
responsibility
that
very
service forward.
seriously,
And then in
should you not resign?
But in 2000, yes. So I stood down in 2010 from that particular role and took my responsibility and shared my role in terms of that responsibility at that time on the council. There's then been a period of time between that, and then I subsequently became the South Yorkshire Police Commissioner. And of course, with the benefit of hindsight and all the lessons that have been learnt with the Home Affairs Select Committee reports, the Children's Commissioner's reports, the NSPCC and Bernardo's, there's been a huge amount of learning. And of course, I've taken all of this and made sure that it's fully implemented in South Yorkshire Police, and it's now making a difference to many, many more young people in South Yorkshire and in Rotherham. So I took my responsibility seriously. I stood down in 2010, and I've subsequently taken those lessons and brought them to bear on South Yorkshire Police here and now.
What's your message for the victims then today?
My message is, from my perspective, clearly I'm very sorry for any abuse that took place. If I could have prevented it, I would. Any right-minded human being would want to protect vulnerable children. Of that, I am convinced. And all I can say is that this is a top priority for South Yorkshire Police. It will remain a top priority for South Yorkshire Police for as long as I'm in this role. And I can only say that I hope to see services being improved, more of this crime being prevented, more victims being protected, and more of the perpetrators being prosecuted. And of that I give an absolute pledge and commitment going forward. And
briefly, do you think you did anything wrong?
Of course I take my share of the responsibility. There was systemic failure, and I only wish that I knew more at the time. If I knew then what I know now, then clearly more could have been done. I think I took appropriate actions where that information was available. I do have regrets that perhaps I weren't more aware of the issue at the time, where I could have perhaps influenced services better. But in the end, I regret my role in that systemic failure, and I've taken responsibility for that.
But you feel ultimately you haven't failed anyone?
I've just answered that question. I've taken my responsibility.